What's up, y'all? This is Hammer here again, back with another video. And today, what I'm going to be talking about is the fact that the future is trans and it is not female, right? The future is trans, not female. Now, there are many reasons. First of all, I've been wanting to touch on this topic for a very long time. I've just never had a time to kind of get to it. I think it's very important. I have a lot of things to say. But there were particularly two reasons why I wanted to talk about this, right? The first reason was the fact that I was seeing this just rising number of white feminists, right? Feminists in general that were being enraged about the trans movement. And it got me furious about the fact that they did not have the brain cells to put two and two together and say, wait a minute, maybe transgenderism and all these things is the sort of logical conclusion of the feminist movement, the feminist, cycle, right? This entire movement, right? The logical conclusion, right? That's what got me mad. The second reason I think I want to dive into the topic is because I got tired of hearing white conservatives who had essentially given up on the LGBT fight, have largely accepted gay marriage, but all of a sudden wanted to, hang their hats or I guess, get all mad and pennies in the bunch over trans. I mean, if you decided to essentially let the LGB through, lesbians, gay, bisexual, and the gay marriage through, don't then come to me and cry about trans and all that shit. Because at that point, I'm going to get furious, right? But on top of that, another reason why I wanted to kind of dive into this because, there was a feminist, and it's not just because of many other. You have Kelly J. Keane and others, right? But a particular one called Megan Murphy, who, as usual, she is part of the first example I was talking about, right? One of these white feminists who, before the whole trans stuff, they had no problem being out there pushing feminist rhetoric. And you could tell that none of them actually analyzed what they were saying and what the logical conclusion of the ideology was. And of course, once the logical conclusion of the ideology came to fruition and it gave birth to this Frankenstein monster called transgenderism and it's now eating apart white feminists, all of a sudden now they find themselves in a bad position. What I'm going to do in this video, right, and I think I'm going to try and dive into all this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch the video in three parts, right? Bring the video in three parts. The first part is I'm going to talk about how feminism, is how transgenderism is the logical conclusion of feminism and how all these feminists who can see it, I just maybe they're retarded or just can't put two and two together, right? Then I'm going to talk about how feminists right now find themselves in a bad position, and then finally how, this overall, hurts women, and maybe it's a conclusion in the end, right? So let's go into the first part, right? One thing that truly gets me angry is how when you look at Kara Densky, when you look at many of the gender critical feminists, it truly does get me angry how many of them cannot put two and two together and realize how the ideology that you've been pushing for all these years, right? This is its logical conclusion. And for some reason, when folks bring this up, it's almost like they find themselves in a bad position because, okay, you know what? I'm trying to maintain the ideology, but quote unquote reject the fact that this is a logical conclusion, right? And let me just break it down how this works, okay? And to be fair to the women, right? Although feminism was spearheaded, by women's interest in having their own independence, let's keep it real here. Industrial capitalism essentially created the environment for this to happen. I've said it multiple times. I will say, 40% of feminism is a women, 60% is the environment. Right? Because feminism can only exist as long as the environment is willing to support it. That's the reason why during the hunter-gatherers age, the agrarian age, there was no feminism. Why? Because the environment essentially required women to rely on men for survival. So that could not flourish. It wasn't until capitalism, it wasn't until especially the industrial and post-industrial environment came into place that women were now able to support themselves, be independent. So once industrialization happened, the post-industrial post-industrial economy happened, right, it created an environment in which women could now survive on their own. And this, paired up with their desire for survival, is what allowed feminism to flourish, right? So with that being said, let's dive into the ideology itself, right? The core ideology, the core really basic framework of feminism is the idea of we need to essentially separate biological sex from gender roles. Because here's what people need to understand. During the agrarian age, right, we were living under a patriarchal traditional social order. And under this patriarchal traditional social order, right, gender roles were essentially determined by your biological sex. So men have certain gender roles because they were born with the male biological sex. Women have certain gender roles, right? When industrialization happened, especially the post-industrial economy happened, right, and women wanted to kind of gain independence, right, one way they were able to advocate for this, right, in addition to them using the environment, they also pushed for the separation of biological sex from gender roles. The whole idea is just because I am born as a female, I should not be forced to play a certain, gender role in society, right? That's what they will push for, right? And over time, they started to downplay the importance of biological sex in order to push this, right? Oh, well, I can do anything a man can do better, right? But the crazy part is, they were advocating for the erasure of essentially gender roles on the female side, while simultaneously keeping gender roles on the male side. So on one hand, I shouldn't have to be a stay-at-home mom. I shouldn't have to stay at home. I should be able to go out there, be able to do all these things. But when it comes to a man, he needs to still be the provider, still be the protector. He still needs to play those traditional roles, right? And of course, the state, went along with it because, once again, you have to understand, in this situation, it benefited both the women, the state, and the environment, right? When it came to the women, they essentially got to pick and choose when they wanted to play gender roles. And when it came to the state, right, they were able to now have, they were able to bring in half the population to the workforce, make them into a consumer class and a tax base. And they were also able to ensure that men will still maintain the infrastructure and generating, resources for the state. And also being able to use them to project power in regards to the military overseas. Right? And of course, when it came to the capitalist system, they were able to, of course, increase the labor in the economy and stagnate wages, right? Because when women came into by women coming to the workplace, right, they had more of a labor force. They didn't have to pay men as much because now they have women working. So overall, this allowed them to have more labor and essentially stagnated wages, right? So that's how all of this essentially enabled feminism to be able to have this sort of what I call double standard situation, right? But nevertheless, one thing that people have told feminists is that this ideology, this road you're going down is very dangerous. Because the ideological framework that you're choosing to go down has a two-edged sword to it. And what does that mean, right? Yes, on one hand, coupled with the industrial environment, the post-industrial environment, it allows women to be independent, but it also reduces the importance of biological sex when it comes to gender roles or when it comes to creating norms for the society. But what does this mean? This means that this opens the door for practices and people who have traditionally been kept out of the mainstream are now going to be able to enter the mainstream because, the traditional patriarchal norms that were based on biological sex gender roles are being pushed away. In other words, throughout the agrarian age, we had a patriarchal social order that essentially defined gender roles based on biological sex. By you guys essentially reducing the importance of biological sex in order to get rid of gender roles, you've weakened the patriarchal social order, and now you've essentially given space for, untraditional practices that have been kept in the periphery to now enter the mainstream space. And I'm specifically talking about things like homosexuality, right? Transgender. Look, gays, transvestites, because the original name was, right? transvestites and gays have always existed, right? The only difference is that because the patriarchal social order was weakened due to feminism and the industrialization, right, this then opened the door for them to come through. But here's the irony here, right? And this the second part. So this is the first part. This is how, feminism essentially leads to the whole transgender situation. Which is, look, if you're going to essentially reduce the importance of biological sex in order to, erase gender roles for women, right? Not only does this weaken the patriarchal social order, it also opens the door for practices and people that were kept at the periphery to enter the mainstream space, right? Now, how does this put feminists in a bad position, right? Because for the first part, of course, is how this leads to transgenderism, right? But how does this put feminism in a bad position? The reason why this puts feminism in a bad position, right, is that feminism essentially now find themselves in a trap, right? Because on one hand, you have been trying to essentially downplay biological sex in order to quote unquote reduce gender roles or remove gender roles for women, but now that you have these practices and people from the periphery entering the mainstream space, they're saying, well, yeah, the same way, we sort of downplayed biological sex for gender roles, we also need to downplay biological sex for LGBT, for trans, right? So if biological sex doesn't matter when it comes to women's gender roles, then biological sex shouldn't matter for transvestites, right? I should be able to come in the room as a man in a dress. Why not, right? It doesn't matter if my biological sex is a woman, right? That should be downplayed, and instead, that should be downplayed for a much more inclusive society, right? Essentially. So now feminists are now finding themselves in a bad position. How do you, on one hand, downplay biological sex to, advocate for the erasure of gender roles for women, right? Specifically, advocate for much more inclusive gender roles where men and women can essentially, interchange gender roles, but simultaneously increase the importance of biological sex against the trans? Well, you can't, right? Because their ideology of I should be able to transition into being a female, it's predicated on the idea of, biological sex being less important and a more inclusive society where people are able to pick the roles they want, regardless of the biological sex, becoming more important. So now, these feminists are now stuck, right? Because, everything we told them was going to happen is happening. It was like, look, yes, in the short term, you're going to have, these benefits, but in the long term, this is going to backfire. Because all of these peripheral groups are going to come into the mainstream. They're going to take advantage of the weakened patriarchal social order. They're going to take advantage of these sort of, decreasing importance of biological sex when it comes to forming these social norms of society. And they're going to say, well, if biological sex doesn't matter when it comes to forming social norms, it shouldn't matter when it comes to what we're trying to do. It shouldn't matter when I'm trying to say I'm a female. Right? And so now what you've started to see is a lot of feminists, coming out of woodwork and all of a sudden declaring the importance of biological sex when it comes to them fighting transgenderism, right? So here's what you're starting to say. And the irony is that Meghan Murphy is a perfect example of this, right? So on one hand, they'll come out here like Kelly J. King, Carrie Dunsky. They'll come out here and say, well, you know what? It doesn't matter if you identify as you were born a man and you are a man, right? You know what? Sex is what matters, not gender, blah, blah. And of course, the people on the left will call them out, right? Say, hey, you guys essentially are being, hateful. And they'll go to the right wing. And the crazy part is this, right? They find themselves in a bad position because they can, on one hand, they cannot recognize that transgenderism is the logical conclusion of them, in many ways reducing the importance of biological sex in order to facilitate a more inclusive environment when it comes to female gender roles, right? Or I guess lack of female gender roles, but simultaneously trying to oppose other groups of people doing the same thing for their, social practices. So women should be able to, quote unquote, downplay biological sex in order for them to erase gender roles, but LGBT cannot when it comes to them pushing trans. They can't downplay biological sex when it comes to them pushing their own transvestite stuff. It's a hypocrisy, and there's a reason why they're stuck. Right? Because on one hand, the people on the left rightfully call out the feminists, say, hey, look, the transgenders and the LGBT, they're just they're essentially in line with feminism, right? They are also downplaying biological sex for a much more inclusive society in which people are able to define their roles irregardless of what sex they were born into. Right? But it's funny how that's okay when it comes to women, but it's not okay when it comes to the LGBT. So that essentially means that all of the feminists who are against trans and gender critical feminists get iced out from the left, and then when they go to the right, people like me essentially say, "Hello, first of all, you're not coming over here." Because the reality of the conversation is, until you acknowledge that it was your feminist ideology and you weakening the patriarchal social order that enabled this to happen, we don't want you over here. In fact, the only thing we're interested in is restoring a strong patriarchal social order in which gender roles are predicated on biological sex. And of course, when we say that, Megan Murphy, Karen, all these feminists talk about, this is sexist, this is oppressing women. Okay, bye. Bye. And so now, all these feminists who are, all of these feminists who are against transgenderism or LGBT are stuck. Because on one hand, they cannot come to terms with the fact that transgenderism is the natural outgrowth, the natural conclusion of their ideology, and so they get pushed out. And on the other hand, they can't really go to the men on the right because the men are making it very clear, you only coming over here if you've fallen back under rigid patriarchy. So now they're stuck. If you listen to Megan Murphy's views, I mean, it's sad, but she's stuck. She's just crying because she doesn't know where to go. She has no home. She's by herself, right? Now, that's the second part, right? So I have addressed how, feminism is the logical inclusion of, I've addressed how transgenderism and LGBT is the logical inclusion of feminism. I've addressed how feminists are stuck. So now I'm going to address how this fundamentally harms women, right? The reason why this fundamentally harms women is because the whole idea of women being able to advocate for their rights is based on the fact of being discriminated based on their biological sex. This transgender movement essentially is saying that, hey, we need to replace sex with gender identity. Why is it important? Gender identity is not based on the sex you're born into. Gender identity is what you feel you are, right? So if I'm a man and I feel, if I'm a man and I feel as a female, that's my gender identity. If I'm a woman and I feel as a man, that's my gender identity, right? And so what this essentially means is that, biological sex, right? Essentially, sex-based rights no longer become something based on, the biological sex you're born into. It now becomes whatever you identify as, right? Why is it important? If anyone can now identify as a female, right, then this essentially makes it impossible for you to advocate for things in regards to women. How can you all advocate for women's issues or for things specific to women where any dude can come in and say I'm a female? It makes it that much more difficult, especially when the definition of being a woman gets blurred. When now they're talking about, we're not talking about, you're a cis woman, you are a birthing person, right? It makes it very hard to advocate for a specific demographic where the definition for that demographic is constantly changing, right? I'm gonna ask you a question: what is a woman now, right? If I say a woman, right, some people will say, it's people who are cis. It's a birthing person. It's whoever this essentially makes it very difficult for them to advocate for themselves, right? So that's the first casualty of when it comes to the transgender woman, right? The second casualty is that now what you are starting to see is the introduction of self-ID laws. Why does it matter? Although gender identity, and you sort of see more and more, countries, slowly redefining sex to gender identity, which means that your identity as being male or female is not based on your biological sex, but it's based on what you identify as, right? You're starting to see more and more of that. But what makes it even more dangerous, in addition to the fact that, in addition to the fact that the redefinition of sex, gender identity, essentially means that you can identify as anything you want to, right? You can identify as either a woman or a man, right? In addition to that, it also opens the door to self-ID, right? What essentially means that you are able to identify without having to go to any medical procedures. Because typically, when states, typically redefine sex to gender identity, what they will typically do is put in place restrictions like, oh, you have to go through this hormone treatment, this surgeries, this medical stuff. However, when it comes to the self-ID laws, right, which is now being pushed in addition to gender identity, it means that not only will you be able to identify whatever you feel like, whether it's a male or female, you'll be able to do this without having to go through any medical procedure. So a dude can really come through, beard and everything, and say, I am now a woman. And a biological woman can be called, so he'll be called a female, and a woman will be called a birthing person. The irony is to say, right? But see, here's what makes it even worse, right? What makes it was that it's not just that, it's not just that. In addition to the fact that biological sex being downplayed, essentially opened the door. In addition to the fact that biological sex being downplayed in order for feminism to be able to reduce or remove gender roles for women, right? In addition to that, it has also enabled for, transgenders and all that kind of stuff to move into the periphery and move into the mainstream, right? Now, why is it important, right? In addition to this happening and essentially, sex being redefined to gender and women losing the ability to essentially define themselves, another thing that we're going to start seeing is that this is ironically laying the foundation for the artificial womb, right? So it's not just that women are going to literally lose their identity. And look, people are going to say, transgenderism also applies to men too, right? The women who transgender, look, the reason why transgenderism does not affect men the way it affects women, because let's just keep it real here, okay? A man transitioning to being a female is not the same as a female transitioning to being a male. It's not even the same. Okay, if you're a man, should be female, right? You still have the biological or physical events. You can go in there and slap every female around. A woman who transitions to be a male, she is still biologically weaker than the men she's dealing with. That's the reason why it's not the same. And to make it even worse, right? Men essentially, for the most part, and this is something that Megan Murphy, feminists don't want to this, right? When it comes to a man, you have a burden of performance that you have to live by. If you're a man and you're homeless or you're broke, nobody gives a fuck. Everybody expects you to go out here, build, and do shit and not complain about it, right? Men are expected to go out here and essentially carry the burden of performance, and you can cry. And if you fail, it's on you. So not only is transitioning from a female to a male harder because they don't have the physical advantage, but on top of that, all of this complaint they do, they're not going to be able to do that as men. They're not going to be able to cry as well. They're going to be held to a burden to perform. That's the reason why a lot of these women who transition to being men transition back, right? They talk about how, hey, when you're a man, like nobody can say, yeah, exactly. See, so when you're a woman, you can cry about shit and folks don't care about, right? When you, because I will agree that the society, although patriarchy is weakened, a lot of wealth and power is still relegated to a small minority of men. But what the interest says that, look, power and responsibility are linked. Yes, men still have some privilege, right? But they also have a lot of responsibility, a lot of burden. Still have a burden of performance. They're still expected to perform, to produce. women are not really supposed to do that, right? Women can always, in the fall hard times, cry out, and society will sympathize with them, right? For the most part, it's really only recently that all of a sudden now folks don't do that anymore because feminism has alienated both the left and men. But that's the reason why it doesn't affect men and women. That's the reason why it mostly affects the women. Because it's much more easier for a man to transition to being a female than it is for a woman to transition to being a man. Okay? So that's what happens, right? But nevertheless, all this does is lay the foundation for the artificial womb, right? In which human beings will essentially be created from scratch, right? In the laboratory, and essentially we will no longer have to go through reproduction. And and I personally believe that this whole trans thing, although it is a logical conclusion of feminism, it is also being used as a social vehicle to facilitate the acceptance of this technology, especially as we're seeing all these birth rates falling. And so we will potentially see a future in which, childbirth will essentially be happening through machines. And what will happen is that men will be able to have children, right, without having to go through women, right? And this will benefit, in my opinion, primarily the men and the state. On one hand, the state will be able to produce children and be able to artificially set the birth rate the way they want to, right? And the men will be able to have children without having to go through women. However, women will find themselves in a position in which, right, they'll still be able to have kids, but they'll have children without the ability of extracting resources from both the state and the men they're attached to. By the way, that matters to women. That's the reason why, despite all these sperm banks available, women are still going out here and getting pregnant by men. Why? Because the only way to get resources through childbirth is through a man or through the state. If they go through a sperm bank, they're essentially on their own. So it's already been shown that if women are forced to take care of a child financially by themselves, they will struggle. They'll try to do it. Men have no problem doing it because, once again, men already have the burden to perform. They already have the financial burden anyway. So for them, being solely responsible economically for a child is not a big deal for them. They're ready to do that anyway. Well, that's the reason why child support and alimony exists. Why? Because although gender roles were removed for women, for men it's still being enforced. Right? Now, you're going to have people in the chat who are going to say, well, what's the difference between transgenderism and transracialism? Because folks there has been this growing topic about transracialism. And here's what I'll tell people, okay? The fundamental difference is, right, transgenderism is really based it's really based on the idea that, hey, look, the only thing that really separates men and women is the biology, right? And so all you have to do is really overcome that biological separation, and you should be able to transition. So it's a whole lot easier to push that. But when it comes to transracialism, the reason why it's hard is because, your race and ethnicity is deeper than biology. I'll give you guys a great example. If I were to go to Western Europe, right, and I was to line up Germans, French, and Anglo-Saxons, right, they all have the same biology, right? They're all white Caucasians, right? So what's the difference? The difference is that although they're all biologically white Caucasian, they all have different they all have a different culture and lineage. The culture and lineage of a German is not the same as the culture and lineage of a French man or an Anglo-Saxon man, right? Biologically, they're all white Caucasians, right? But what separates them is their culture and lineage, right? And that fundamentally is what race and ethnicity is, right? So race and ethnicity, right, is deeper than just biology, right? Because it taps into your culture and it taps into your lineage, which is much more harder for you to, quote unquote, transition into, right? Because when you're looking at biological sex, right, or male and female, all you really got to do is overcome the biological aspect, and that's it. But when you're looking at race and ethnicity, in addition to you overcoming the biological aspect, you also have to overcome the fact that, hey, how do you deal with the cultural aspect? How do you deal with the lineage aspect? That's the reason why, transracialism is way much more difficult concept compared to transgenderism. And another reason why I believe that transracialism is just not really going to happen, in my opinion, is because white people are going to gatekeep whiteness. Right? In other words, if they were to really allow this to happen, not only will this be harder because of the aspect of culture lineage, but on top of that, there will be a fear that a lot of groups will just flood the white classification, right? And so, because of the difficulty of culture lineage, because of the fact that whites will try to maintain the privileges of the white classification, transracialism, in my opinion, is less feasible compared to transgenderism. Okay, so that's the reason why transgenderism, in my opinion, is much more of a common practice, and it's happening more and more, especially in regards to in reality, right? And of course, people will say, oh, that's not fair. Look, you can say whatever you want to say about it, but that's just the reality. Now to conclude, right? Where do we go from here? What I will tell a lot of feminist women and a lot of, folks especially in the, who are screaming about trans, look, I want you guys to stop all of this rhetoric and screaming about transgenderism, right? This is inevitable. This will happen. Oh, and also, I almost forgot, another thing to add on the transracial point. Yes, when the artificial womb comes in and we are able to sort of, when the artificial womb comes in and we're able to create human beings from scratch and kind of edit their eye color, race, sex, and everything, yes, at that point it may be more feasible. But as of now, transgenderism is much more feasible compared to transracialism, due to, of course, the fact that transgenderism only has the biology. Transracialism, you have to take into consideration culture and lineage. But going back to what I was saying, before I close the video, let me just say this real quick. Look, I am tired of all of this complaining and anger about the trans movement. I'm fucking tired of it. Because all of the people that were waving gay flags, supporting LGBT, supporting gay marriage, right? Not only did we tell the feminists that, them using the industrial and post-industrial environment to essentially facilitate this feminist movement was not going to end well for them. Not only did we tell the folks who are waving gay flags that, look, you supporting gay marriage, LGBT is not going to offer you, right? We told them all this. They didn't want to listen. Now that the consequences have come in regards to trans, in regards to gender identity, in regards to artificial womb, in regards to AI girlfriends, which are probably, and that's another too, right? You're probably going to start seeing, when it comes to artificial womb, you're also probably going to start seeing the artificial wife, right? Now, folks say, well, Hammer, what about the artificial? Look, the artificial wife is really only going to work for men because, look, people have argued that, well, if there's an artificial wife, there'll be an artificial husband. Well, it doesn't work the same way, because women can only respect a man if he can produce for them. It's already been established. So a woman, right, her going to get an artificial husband or artificial, husband, right, that artificial being, right, she has to care of. If she has to financially take care of this artificial husband, and that artificial husband cannot provide roots for her, right, she will innately not respect it. But men, however, because men are already programmed or social to support economically, they can go and get an artificial wife and support that wife and be perfectly fine. So it's really not the same thing. And plus, there's no fucking reason why the society will produce artificial, husbands, just pay them. That makes sense, right? If they're going to produce an artificial husband, it's to either, sell them to make profits or use them as free labor. That's reality, right? So unless women become all of a sudden comfortable of taking care of men, the artificial husband is just not going to be a thing. It's also the same reason why money is not what it's for men and women, right? Men have no problem dating down financially. Women have a problem dating down financially, right? Same thing. That's the reason why the artificial wife is going to be more of a thing compared to the artificial husband, right? But with that being said, when you look at the artificial womb, the artificial wife, all these things, all right? We told the feminists, we told the folks who are supporting LGBT, we told us what happened. They won't listen. So I don't want to hear any more complaints about transgenderism. I don't want to hear any more complaints about LGBT. I don't want to hear it because you were warned and you didn't want to listen. And this, I'm probably going to post this video on the Megan Murphy's channel, because she's none of her feminists that's been rambling around. She's a great example of feminists who stuck, because on one hand she can't acknowledge that feminism led to this, but on the other hand she can't go to the men, because the men will tell her, hey, look, you only coming over here if you accept patriarchy. She's stuck. But it is what it is. So I don't want to hear anymore. I'm tired of hearing conservatives complaining about transgenderism while supporting gay marriage. I'm tired of hearing women complaining about transgenderism while talking about how they want to tear down the patriarchy. I'm tired of hearing this. You're going to have to make a choice. Either you accept the full consequences of the LGBT and feminism, or you advocate for the patriarchal traditional social order. There is no in between. It is what it is. And based on what I'm seeing, it's looking like the artificial womb and the artificial wife is going to be the reality fall. But with that being said, I'm going to go and leave it off there. It was a pretty long video, but I had a lot of thought, and I'm happy I was able to get through it. Another thing to add is that, when it comes to the self-ID laws, it's already been passed in multiple nations, right? Like, for example, Finland, Spain has already passed it. So it's already happening. It's already happening. But that being said, y'all, tell me what y'all think in the chat about this. I'm tired, it is what it is, right? All them folks who are supporting, who are pushing for feminism, all these folks who are pushing feminism, pushing for the LGBT and trans stuff, like, you're going to have to make a choice. Either you accept the outcomes of those movements, which is artificial wombs, transgenderism, and your artificial wife, or you essentially admit that the patriarchal social order probably was the best situation we've had. That's the irony about it, right? Because here's the funny part about this. At least under that situation, women were able to at least rely on the biological sex and the gender was attached to it for possession and provision. They can't even do that anymore. Hell, they can't even claim to be women anymore. Right? Now the birthing person. I'm like, it's sad. But with that being said, y'all, that's shit about it. It is what it is. Like, share, subscribe. Hammer out.